So what I'll do is we'll head into the second topic, which is the dealing with, I guess people call it supplements and diet, nutrition, that kind of thing. In our system of healthcare, there are two basic or fundamental realms or kingdoms that we consider. Just like we have the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, we have in this case the kingdom of medicine, which is largely what you're doing with us because that's largely what you need to do at that point. Let's see, the other realm is the realm of what we call regimen or therapeutic regimen. Regimen in this case is a term that covers all of the various therapies, diets, nutrition, adjustive techniques like chiropractic, osteopathic, etc., as well as various supplemental therapies. So each of those realms operates on a law of nature. There are two fundamental laws of nature. The first law is what we call the law of opposites. So if you're not getting enough vitamin C, you need more vitamin C. Or if you're getting too much vitamin C, you need to cut back on the vitamin C. So this is all a question of balance. So that's why we say the law of opposites. If you have too much, you need less. If you have not enough, you need more. And the key is to find the proper balance, that kind of dynamic optimal point, which is tricky, but that's what we're striving to do. In the case of medicine, the natural law is the law of similars. The law of similars is an energetic law, and that's how the energetic medicine works, that if you put two frequencies that are the same or similar together, they cancel each other out. So a particular disease blockage has a particular frequency. And if we give a particular energy frequency, then that energy frequency, if it is the same or similar to the disease blockage, it will cancel out the disease blockage. Very, very simple. But tonight we want to talk about that second realm, the realm of regimen, where the law of opposites applies, the whole question of balance. Now, there's a number of ways of approaching this. Of course, for most people, the issue tends to really come down to what we call diet, nutrition, and supplements. So I'm going to focus my comments, general comments on those. And remember, these are just general comments. This is not a detailed study of all this. Of course, we have students who study this for several years. But I want to give people a basic idea of the way we approach this so you can have a sense of our particular philosophy on this. There's a number of levels that you can come at this. The most basic level is what we call the common sense level. The common sense level is just simply that you avoid that which is harmful and you try to take in that which is beneficial. Now here you have to apply common sense. As my parents used to say, even back in when I was growing up, that if you couldn't pronounce the ingredients on the label, then it probably wasn't worth eating, or it certainly wasn't beneficial for you, because chemicals tend to have long, complicated names, whereas real food or real food components tend to have short and easily recognizable names. So anything that is generally processed, comes in a fancy box, has been subjected to heat treatment, basically it has had chemicals added, synthetic chemicals added. All of these are not food, although we colloquially call them food, but they're not food. They're basically, well, we use the word junk food or snacks or whatever. If you go to a grocery store, basically all the so-called food that's in the center aisles of the store, most of that's not food. Everything on the outside, so the fresh produce, the meats, the dairy products, the fish, vegetables, etc. All of that is generally what we would call food. Now there's a further problem, of course, that a lot of this food has been trucked in from far away. It's been stored for a long period of time, so we can hardly call it fresh, that many of the nutritional value of those foods has disappeared over time. So again, we have in our day movements such as buy local or eat local, organic, get it from a farmer's market. All of these things tend to give you more of the assurance that what you're eating is fresh, nutritious, etc. And also generally, if you know the farmer, you know the people, that they're not using a lot of pesticides and herbicides. We also have the problem today with things like soy products, which are harmful, genetically modified organisms put into plants, the whole problem of GMO, all the chemicals. For example, in North America, legally you can put up to 4,000 synthetic chemicals in any given beer, although the beer companies have told me they only put in 400. Well, legally they could put in 4,000. That's approved. Of course, if you go to Germany, German purity laws, no chemicals can be used in beer. You just get the pure beer. So it's an increasing struggle to find foods that aren't processed or have had chemicals added or that haven't been genetically modified. But that's the common sense level. I think by now everyone is more or less educated to the level of avoiding those things. The second level is when you get to specific diets, because we seem to be quite big on diets, and people are usually have a sense that I need to go on some kind of diet in order to fix my health problem, or at least alleviate the health problem. And there's lots of diets out there, of course. The approach we take, because we find this the most scientific, is that most of us have a kind of typological part of us. And that means that regardless of where we live and who we are and how old we are generally, we tend to react to certain foods based on certain typologies. The most fundamental of those typologies is what we call the blood type. And again, we're not just typologies, we're also individual. So that any typology has its limitations, but we find that the blood type can tell you quite a bit about the kinds of foods that are generally healthy for you and that your body likes, and the ones that aren't. The old expression, one man's meat is another man's poison, which means that, I'll give you an example. I used to think I was eating healthy. Instead of eating sugary snacks, I would go and buy some nuts, but I would go and buy cashews and peanuts, which was readily available. And I would find myself falling asleep after lunch. And I later discovered with the blood type diet that these are the wrong kind of nuts for me. Not that there was anything wrong with them, but I had to eat walnuts and pecans and almonds, for example. And then I would actually get more energy. So the blood type diet, and that information is quite readily available. It gives you a pretty good indication, in a general sense, for most people, of the kinds of foods that you should be eating and the ones you should be avoiding. There are a couple of other typologies that we look at, but the main one, particularly for adults, would be what we call the glandular type. There's 4 basic glandular types: a pituitary type, a thyroid type, adrenal, and gonadal type. I won't go into the detail on that, but they also can influence, to a certain degree, whether you should be eating more vegetable-type foods or whether you should be eating more protein-type foods, so carbohydrates versus proteins, but again, the healthy carbohydrates. Once you get past the typology, for most people, you then face another level of problem, which is that some people have very specific issues. And those issues are not addressed just by dealing with the typology. So then you have to look at specific diets, at least for a short period of time, to address those issues. Typically now, in our modern time, we have things like gluten intolerance. Although the actual celiac disease, as they call it, or disorder, is relatively limited, a lot of people have problems with gluten. One of the main reasons is because of the genetic modification of the grains, but also because the foods aren't prepared anymore in the traditional way, and that the old traditional way involved a lot of fermentation, which broke down the gluten aspect of the food, of the grain, and therefore would make it digestible. So everything's done in a very fast way, so it bypasses this old traditional fermentation process. But gluten diet or gluten-free diets, gluten-free foods are something that many people need to do in the short term. There's the specific carbohydrate diet, which again focuses on the good versus the bad carbohydrates, etc. Gets away from the sugar problem of disturbing the gut function as well as internal energy function. We have specific diets that address gut dysbiosis, such as the GAPS diet, the whole fermentation of foods approach, the nourishing traditions approach of the, I'm trying to think of the name, of the center that promotes that. I can't think of it right now. So we have diabetic diets. We have diets that try to avoid things like oxalates. We have other diets that are focused specifically for seizures, for example, ketogenic diets, etc., which is essentially protein, heavily protein fats diet. Finally, we have the debate between vegetarian and meat. And a lot of people think to be healthy you have to be vegetarian, but it's not about that. It depends on your typology. It depends on many other factors as to whether you should eat more vegetarian or less, or more meat or less. And it's not one or the other. In fact, if you are a particular type, you need to eat meat. Now, the problem, again, going back to our common sense level, is that most of the meats we find in North America in particular are heavily laden with antibiotics and hormones and are raised in these confined animal feed operations, which basically produce a very poor quality of meat in terms of nutrition and not very good tasting as well. So you need to find grass-fed, pastured, organic, that kind of thing. And so it's not the volume, but the quantity. I had a patient once that decided to be a vegetarian, but was constantly suffering from fatigue. But her typology was that she had to eat a certain amount of meat. And she refused for a long time, and that's fine. I respected that because that was her decision. But so you can't really complain about lack of energy if you're refusing to eat meat, because that's what it's due to in this case. So she finally tried a little bit of meat, and sure enough, her energy went up, and then that proved the point. Again, she could still decide not to eat, but that's the consequence of that. So it's not about belief and religious belief or political belief or environmental belief or whatever. It's more a matter of what's good for your health in this sense, and that's all I can address. Now, beyond typology, we also have individuality. So we're all unique, and that's found in our genetic profile. So there are genetic factors that can dictate which foods are good for us or which are not, or which ones we can eat readily and which we can't. And those, again, need to be looked into, although that's an emerging science, but that is something that more and more we have to look at. This is where you'll find a lot of allergic reactions, so-called allergic reactions that come in because of these individual factors, and they're not predictable. You just have to discover them through elimination diets or trial and error, but hopefully over time we'll have a more scientific and faster way to do that. Now, so on the question of diets, basically, our approach is There's nothing wrong with trying a strict diet in the short term if that's what you feel you need based on various assessments that have been done by someone. But I think, as everyone knows, you can only do a strict diet for so long. It demands a tremendous amount of energy, and it can only be kept up for so long. And as the child gets older and older, they resist those diets. And that's the reason why we also work on the medicine side, because if you're just doing diet, then you're trying to fix everything with one tool, as it were, and that doesn't work very well. Whereas if we can remove the blockages that are there, that are also interfering with digestion, that are creating allergic type reactions, that are creating gut dysbiosis, etc., if we can remove those disease blockages, then the gut function, the whole metabolic function starts to improve, and then you don't need to rely on a strict diet to try to control the problem. So generally speaking, as you go through treatment, you find that you can ease up on the diet. The child can eat more and more things, but of course then the question comes, what are the healthy things? Well, as I said earlier, that depends a lot on your typology and a lot about the common sense, avoiding things that we know are just not good for you. Eating Pringles and GMO food and heavily high fructose corn syrup sodas and what's so-called chocolate bars, which are not chocolate bars, they're really candy bars. All those things are not going to promote your health, so of course you don't want to use them. But again, here, especially for children, it's important that they be allowed to be part of the culture around them. So I generally apply what I call the 80-20 rule, which is a rule that kind of pervades all of nature and human culture, which is that if you do the right thing 80% of the time, then you can kind of break from the rules 20% of the time. So occasionally, one day a week, you can go out and eat a pizza and have a soda and eat at McDonald's or something, but that shouldn't be the normal pattern. Otherwise, then you're just asking for trouble. Now, on the question of supplements, the issue here really is that our body doesn't function very well on fractionated things that have been isolated from their whole, as it were. So supplements are really based on the idea that somehow man can extract a so-called active element, a particular vitamin, a particular enzyme, whatever, and package it, and then your body can take that in. But we weren't really made to take things in a fractionated way. Often the whole process itself can damage the product. A good example of this is vitamin C. That most of us, what we call vitamin C is really ascorbic acid. And ascorbic acid is only one part of vitamin C, what's called vitamin C. But the other parts are left out. They're in the processing. And also because ascorbic acid is very cheap to make, without adding all the others, which are very expensive, then essentially when you buy vitamin C, that's what you get. You get this ascorbic acid. Same with salt. Salt in its natural form can contain anywhere from 60 to 94 minerals, although the dominant mineral is sodium chloride. Now, it's just cheaper to produce that, extract all of the other stuff, and just sell this pure sodium chloride, because the chemical industry uses pure sodium chloride for a lot of reactions. So they produce it in massive quantities. They're big factories that produce this. So that's what they sell as salt. But that's not really salt anymore. That's just sodium chloride. So these are all fractionated in some form or other. And it's the same with vitamins and minerals that come in pill or tablet or whatever form. A classic example of this is the one-a-day multivitamin, which is very popular. Everybody seems to take one, but they really don't do any good. Your body can't assimilate them. There's a lot of fillers. It's just full of a lot of fractionated, often not completely natural highly synthesized components, and it's not very valuable. We're intended to take things in a whole food form. That's the way nature intended it. So the best supplements are those supplements that come from what we could call superfoods. And there's two types of superfoods. And these are foods that come in a kind of powder form by a very ingenious process that was developed only over the last couple of decades that doesn't destroy the living quality, the nutritive quality of the food itself, and yet allows it to be packaged and stored, and all you have to do is add water and put it into a smoothie. But the whole food that is made from these specially nutritious substances, and there's a series of them, of course. I won't go into it here, but they contain various enzymes, micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, etc. Although mostly often not vitamin C, because that's not very stable and gets destroyed easily even in that process. So when you eat those, the body takes that in. It's readily assimilable, even though on the label it may say that it has a very low level of international units or micrograms of this or that. But it's not the amount or quantity, it's how much can be assimilated. You may have 1,000 international units on a packaged product, fractionated product, but the body may absorb 2 to 5% of that. Whereas you may have 1/4 of that in the whole food, but the body absorbs 50 to 80% of that. So in the end, you're getting a lot more from the whole food. But what also comes in here is the whole dynamic equation, that nothing in nature operates in a vacuum. This is kind of the conceit of the human mind, that somehow we can give one thing and not affect anything else. Everything is interrelated. This is the problem with drug interactions, is that you give one drug, then another drug, and a third drug, and a fourth drug, and nobody really knows anything about the interaction between these drugs, because normally what they study is just the effect of one drug. But it's the same thing. If you're taking a whole host of supplements recommended all for a supposedly good reason by maybe the same individual or another different individuals, but nobody really knows what the synergistic interactive effect of all these individual supplements are. But if you're taking it in a whole food form, that's the way nature supplies it. We know that that's safe. And all we're doing is we're just putting it in a more concentrated form because we need, for a period of time, a kind of super nutrition to help us over our health deficit. So that's generally what we prefer, is these superfoods. And again, there are more and more of those being developed, very good quality, some not so good quality. Your local health food store generally has a pretty good idea of the higher quality ones, the ones that have a better reputation. And again, you can talk to your practitioner. There's various websites like Dr. McCullough's website or Mike Adams, the Health Rangers website, that have done a lot of extensive research on these superfoods, particularly Mike Adams' website, naturalhealth.com, I think. I can't remember the address, but just search Mike Adams Health Ranger. And you will find the ones that are the best and the highest quality. And these are generally, from our perspective, a better kind of supplement than specific ones. Now, again, you can choose to use other supplements, but we don't generally recommend specific supplements that way, because I personally don't know which ones are good for you or your child, and I don't know also what are the interactions between all these different individual supplements. I'd much prefer to leave it to nature and God in that sense to sort it out with the inner wisdom of your own natural healing power. I have a very good friend who's a pharmacist, studied pharmacology and pharmacognosy, and he said it's really absurd that we could even begin to say that we understand the interactions of all these things in the human body. So that's why I prefer to avoid using individual supplements, simply because in the end I've discovered they often can be more of a burden to the body, although you might get some short-term benefits, but often that's just finding it out by trial and error. There's really very little scientific basis for many of the decisions for these kinds of supplements. The whole issue here, again, comes down to the dynamic aspect, and that is what we're looking for, the energetic aspect. And if the food is not whole, if the supplement is not whole, then you're getting too much of the dead, crude material that really is a burden to the body, and the body has to get rid of it. That puts a burden on the liver, the kidneys, the whole detox function, on the gut. But if you're taking in living foods, then those living foods actually will assist the body. So that's generally what we prefer. Now, just as a general comment for other therapies, such as essential oils or various herbs or tissue salts, or therapies like hyperbaric oxygen, or manipulative therapies like cranial sacral massage, etc. All of those are fine. They don't interfere with what we're doing, and generally, to the extent you can avail yourself of those and use them, again, they are often healthy. The problem here is there's not a lot of science behind which one should be applied. It's a bit of trial and error as well, although we're working on trying to identify what kinds of things work in what kind of situation. But unfortunately, we don't have a very scientific, rational basis for that right now. So it's a bit of trial and error in this case. You have to see how your child responds to that. But our overall principle is, as one person famously said many years ago, the KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid, in the sense of we have a tendency to complexify things, to complicate things, and it's much better generally to do less than more. In that sense, often less is more. Luckily, as you're going through treatment, as your child is going through treatment, you will find that the number of supplements you've been using can be winnowed down quite a bit. You'll find that the strict diets aren't as necessary, and you can ease off on a lot of those. But again, to say, the whole issue of supplements is a tricky one, and I just gave you our general approach to that, but at the end of the day is something you have to decide for yourself, although we'll give you the benefit of our advice and what we feel would work best. But no one is a complete expert in this field. It's still very, very confusing in many ways. Okay, I'm going to look at the questions. There's some questions here that aren't related directly to the talk I'm doing right now, and I don't want to mix the energy medicine one with the regimen because they're going to be posted separately. So let's just select this one. Do you recommend gluten-free, casein-free diet for ASD kids, even if a kid is not allergic to gluten, casein, or soy? Well, I don't generally recommend strict diets because it tends to work on the basis of one size fits all. And one size doesn't fit all. Some kids will do well on it, other kids will not. And it can even be stressful. So what we generally, I would say, is that the idea behind the gluten-free, casein-free diet is a good one. And certainly in general terms, you should be, you could say, eating as if you were on that kind of a diet. But I would take into account the blood type, for example, particularly with kids, so that the O blood type or the B blood type would tell you what kind of foods within the general guidelines of a casein-free, gluten-free diet would be best for you. The same with the specific carbohydrate diet. You want to get rid of a lot of the grains, and you want to go more for the vegetable type of carbohydrates. But again, you can't eliminate the protein side because some children need more protein. Others would need more of the carbohydrates, but again, the specific carbohydrates. I'll take this question. Can you explain how an herb could be an irritant? Well, it's not quite a regimen, but Um, Herbs operate on the basis of what we call irritant action. They irritate something. Now, at a general level, that's fine. It's a bit like if you have a child who's relatively healthy and they're sitting around all day on the sofa and you kind of bug them to get them out and doing something or doing something more productive. That's a kind of irritant action, and that can be very productive. So herbs at a certain level can be useful, but if you use them too much, that irritation starts to cause a counteraction on the part of the body, and it will build up a defense against that. That's why after a while the effect of the herb wears off, and you either have to increase the amount, which is usually not a good idea, or you have to stop using it and take a break and come back to it. But herbs also have a lot of crude matter in them, and in that sense, you know, they can have effects. You really have to know what you're doing when you're using herbs, because many of them can have, you could say, slight poisonous effects. As my pharmacologist friend said, herbs are just kinder, gentler drugs in a sense. Although they're natural, they can have negative effects on the system. That's why we prefer to use energy medicine, and we take the crude out. Many of the energy medicines are originally from herbs. Let's take one, pulsatilla, is made from particular flower, the wind anemone. Other would be, I'm trying to think of one right now, I can't, brionia, made from a particular plant, equisetum, etc. There's all sorts of homeopathic energetic remedies that are made from herbs, but what we've done is we've removed the crude and we're just working with the energetic or dynamic action of the herb. And then we apply it on a different basis. We apply it on the basis of the law of similars, not on this irritant action, which most of herbal medicine is based on. Okay, here's a question. What is your opinion on cleansing and or fasting? Well, again, there are many variants and approaches. My approach generally is to do it as gently as possible. A lot of people go gung-ho into this, but you can't sustain it for a long period of time. I much prefer an approach to cleansing and fasting that is something that you do as part of your lifestyle. So a very simple approach would be you don't eat anything after 8 o'clock at night, and then again you don't eat anything before 8 o'clock in the morning, or you don't eat anything after 6 o'clock, and you don't eat anything again before 6 o'clock in the morning. That gives you 12 hours. Within those 12 hours, the body is able to go through a full detox cycle. So in essence, you're fasting. That's why we have the word breakfast, which really means break fast. That's what people did. They didn't eat basically from 6 to 6. And if you do that, you're fasting every day. And that's the most efficient way and the easiest way to do that. It takes a certain amount of discipline, but then you can avoid going through these more intensive fasts. Sometimes an intensive fast is required in certain circumstances, and that requires a little more skill and support and knowledge. But for most people, if you do that approach, that works. Same with, there's a great system called a water fast, which anyone can do using distilled water, and you just drink basically a couple of liters of distilled water every day, and you can do that while you're eating a regular diet and everything else. And if you do that consistently over a period of time, 4 to 6 weeks, for example, I think it is, then that will cleanse out your system. Then you don't need to do a more intensive kind of fasting. And then again, that's relatively easy to do. People will do hard things for short periods of time, but after a while it becomes increasingly difficult, and then things break down. So if you do that approach, it's fairly simple. Anyone can do it, and it's something you can keep up with and make it part of your lifestyle. How do cells work on the body? Well, generally speaking, they have, again, a dynamic action. they're part of your metabolic function. And so when we give them in dynamic form, essentially. And what we're trying to do is influence the function. So if a particular cell salt function is out of whack, out of balance, then giving an energetic form of that cell salt function will bring it back into balance. Now, that, of course, doesn't take into account all the other factors that are influencing it as well, and they need to be addressed. But if we're keeping it just to that cell salt function, then we can influence that energetically. But the cell salts are the necessary minerals in your cell that make all of the metabolic functions happen. And if they're, again, missing or out of balance. Now, you get them from your food. Your body produces them from the food. So if you're taking in your superfood, then your body will produce the different cell salts that it needs. But what it can do sometimes is change the function. So we sometimes have to intervene with specific salts. The cell salts, the tissue salts, are basically an attempt to influence the way those minerals function. Okay. When having trouble metabolizing sugars, is it better to really restrict them or to keep trying to address the underlying issue and to just keep eating the fruit, honey, good carbs, etc. in moderation? Well, in the very short term, of course, at the beginning, if you're having trouble metabolizing anything, you should avoid them. But as you improve in your health, particularly by removing the underlying blockages and making changes in your diet and lifestyle generally, then you could reintroduce those, assuming those are healthy for you to begin with. And that, again, depends on your typology or your individual factors. So if something's not good for you regardless, then you shouldn't be eating it. It doesn't matter that it's a healthy food, but if it's not really good for your metabolism, then you should be avoiding it. But if you had, let's say, a gut dysbiosis, and even if a food supposedly is healthy for you, but you're reacting badly to it, then it's better to avoid it for a short period of time until you can get your gut back into a better balance and we can remove some of the underlying blockages, and then your gut function improves, then you can reintroduce those foods. Okay. Okay. I found it really difficult to determine my 4-year-old son's metabolic and glandular types based on the info in Journey to Health. Is there a place I could find more info, or would it be better just find out his blood type and focus on that instead? Yes. For children, generally the blood type is going to be more than sufficient. When you come into adults, after puberty, teenagers, young adults, older adults, etc., that's where the glandular type definitely plays more of a role. But I would say that if you focus on the blood type, that is the most fundamental, and then for now that will probably give you the best guidance. The other thing you can do is we give that information because it's easy to give out, and it saves you money if you can take the time to read it and figure it out. Hopefully it's as explanatory as it can be. But some people book an appointment just to discuss aspects of that and get some more individual guidance. So you can do that as well. But for a child, generally, you're going to find the best advice comes from that blood type. I'd say that that's about 80% effective. Now, that doesn't address if there's severe gut dysbiosis or there is, an oxalate problem or some methylation issue or whatever. Those may affect, though, even though the blood type says this is okay for you, he or she may be reacting nonetheless negatively for now to that. So that's where you have to just, again, stay away from those foods until we can improve the overall condition, and then based on the typology, generally, they can be reintroduced. Okay, well, I think I've covered all of the questions that I had here on the regimen side. Again, I can't cover everything or in great detail, but I hope I've given you at least an overview in terms of how we approach these things. We're continuing to work on this. We are developing a new regimen program, a 2 to 3 year program for practitioners to implement all of our new findings and try to put the whole issue of supplements and diet and fasting and detox and everything else, to put that on a more rational scientific footing, instead of just, you know, one person saying it and everybody should be on the gluten-free, casein-free diet, or everybody should be on the SCD diet, or everybody should be on the you know, GAPS diet. Doesn't work that way. And there are lots of people who will claim that it worked really well, but just as many people who find that it didn't help or might even have made things worse. So we need a more rational approach that is able to look at the factors that are individual to your child, to yourself, and that can give us a better guidance in terms of the kinds of things that will work better for you. But again, our overall emphasis is on keeping it simple. Simple foods, basic foods, superfoods, using the minimum necessary to achieve the maximum effect, instead of trying to deal with everything through diet or deal with everything through supplements. I have cases where, you know, 100, 150 different supplements are being given every day, and that can't be healthy. The kidney, the liver, the whole lymphatic system can't handle that. Most of them are fractionated, and there may be some logic or reason behind each one, but again, nobody can tell you all the synergistic effects. But if you take a whole food, even a blueberry or an apple or broccoli or coconut or hemp heart seeds or whatever, these are very complex foods, but all this was put together by nature, not by the mind of man, because our knowledge about these things is still very limited. Despite what we think we know, all that's overwhelmed by what we actually don't know. So anyway, I hope you found this useful. And again, if you have more specific questions about your case, you can always schedule something and we can talk about that in more detail. Thanks for watching, and I'll say good night.